want you to think about something for a moment. Think about your perceptions of church, going back over the course of your life. And this is whether you were raised in church or were exposed to it a lot or maybe not at all. But we all have our personal perceptions. We all have our cultural perceptions. And think about it, especially when it comes to, did you think of church as the people inside of there are most likely really joyful? They're happy type people, they're joyful. Also, did you perceive church as kind of a forward-looking thing, ready to embrace the new? Now, I think the surface response to that, for most people, would be honestly no to both. I didn't perceive the people in there as being joyful. I thought of them as kind of more austere, kind of rigid, that kind of thing. And then also, as far as embracing the new, honestly, that is the thing that a lot of people in our culture have as far as church goes. Our perceptions is they're kind of backward. We're stuck in the past somehow. Well, one of the reasons we've been going through the book of Luke is we're saying we want to fix our eyes on Jesus, and we're trying to discover who he is as opposed to who we think he might be, or even as the church might perceive him to be. So with that said, we're going to go and we're going to look at Jesus through the eyes of the book of Luke today and think about this whole perception that people do have that's not a very joyful place, it's not a very forward-looking place, because we need to relearn some things in light of that. We're in a passage in Luke chapter 5, and we're going to begin at verse 33. It says this: "They said to him, 'John's disciples often fast and pray, and so do the disciples of the Pharisees. But yours go on eating and drinking.' Jesus answered, 'Can you make the friends of the bridegroom fast while he is with them? But the time will come when the bridegroom will be taken from them. In those days they will fast.' He told them this parable: 'No one tears a piece out of a new garment to patch an old one. Otherwise, they will have torn the new garment, and the patch from the new will not match the old. And no one pours new wine into old wineskins. Otherwise, the new wine will burst the skins. The wine will run out, and the wineskins will be ruined. New wine must be poured into new wineskins. And no one, after drinking old wine, wants the new, for they say the old is better.'" Now let's put this passage in its context. All right, so Jesus is in the northern part of Israel called Galilee, and in this region, the relationship of rabbis to disciples is a very common one. It's a known thing, very typical thing. Jesus is a rabbi, he has disciples. The Pharisees have some of them are rabbis, and they have disciples. John the Baptist would have been considered a rabbi type figure who had disciples. Disciples are considered apprentices. They are imitators. They're learning from the rabbi, and the plan is to become a rabbi themselves. It's just like the one they've been following. They're supposed to memorize his words. They're supposed to watch his actions. They're supposed to even imitate the actions that he takes. So this is a very, very common thing. And so the Pharisees have been introduced by Luke in this chapter. And because Jesus is now the rabbi, he is the one that's getting the most following. All kinds of people are listening to him. He speaks with authority. We've seen that in the last few weeks. He heals people. He drives out demons. He's very dramatic. There are people are crowding around him to be around him. So other rabbis and Pharisees and teachers of the law, kind of religious experts, they come to that region and they're following Jesus around to check out what he's saying, to see if he's really someone that people ought to be following. And they're testing him. And so far, they've seen Jesus claim to forgive sins. And they say, "You can't forgive sins." And he says pretty much, yeah, I can. And then they also see him invite someone, this is what we saw last week, invite someone to follow him that you're not supposed to have follow you, because he invited a tax collector, and tax collectors were hated for all kinds of different reasons. He does that. But then here, they point out the fact that he doesn't fast. He and his disciples don't fast. Now, what they're pulling from is that it was known that the Pharisees at that time, typically, if you were a good Pharisee, you picked 2 days out of the week that you did fast, and oftentimes went without not only food, but also water. Morning to night, you would go without food. And so that was just a regular practice. So if you're a Pharisee, on Tuesdays and Thursdays, you're going without food and water as a religious practice to show that you're very, very serious about this thing. But they point out to Jesus, they say, "Hey, listen, okay, even John the Baptist, your cousin, we know you're a fan of his, His disciples do this. Everybody's fasting, and you guys, every time we look up, you're at the buffet line for every single meal. By the way, you remember buffet lines? Buffet lines is a really big loss during this COVID thing. You pay one price, got all the food you want. But Jesus and his disciples, they were going through buffet lines for every meal. And so they would have followed him around for 2 or 3 weeks in a row. They're looking for his practice of fasting and praying, and it never happens. And so they call on him. Because think about it, it's not really an illegitimate question. Like, we're all doing this. It's a part of how things have gone in our culture for a long time. God actually commands it really for only one time a year. It's on the Day of Atonement. Everybody fasted. But heroes of the faith like Moses and Daniel and people like that were known to fast. And so it was something that was taken on as a practice to show that you're really, truly serious about your Judaism. And so Jesus would have come across as honestly a little bit loose with all this kind of thing. He was called, in a later gospel, it says he was called a glutton and a drunkard. His enemies accused him of that. Well, why? Well, in the answer that he gives, I want to give you one takeaway today that I kind of want to get you have you get a hold of when it comes to fixing our eyes on Jesus. Let me put it to you this way. To fix your eyes on Jesus, take his claims about himself seriously. As we listen to his answer, let's say it again. To fix your eyes on Jesus, take his claims about himself seriously. Because when Jesus answers, he makes claims about himself. He doesn't just answer the question. Jesus almost never just answers straight out. He always gives these multi-layered answers, and that's exactly what's going on here. And what he does is he picks an image that everybody knew, everybody was familiar with. Some of these Pharisees and these different people that he was talking to, they were married. They had been through a wedding feast. And if you weren't married, you had certainly been to a wedding feast, because what he picks is the image of joy for that culture. He says this whole thing of, can the bridegroom ask the friends of the bridegroom to fast while he's with them? Now, why does he say that? Because for that culture at that time, there was really no more festive, joyful, participated in thing than a wedding feast. Now, to this day, the Jewish people are known to have great weddings, and I've served in Afghanistan, and in that part of the world, weddings are an enormous deal. We make a pretty big deal out of weddings, but they make a very big deal out of weddings. As a matter of fact, as we watched the country of Afghanistan get built, we knew things were getting better and better, even though they're still struggling when they built wedding halls. And these wedding halls that they build, these big reception areas, they look like something out of Las Vegas. They have lights everywhere and everything, and it's kind of a trip, but that's how much focus and emphasis they place on weddings. Well, in Jesus' day, they would take out an entire week. And the thing about it is that you were expected to celebrate when you showed up there. You weren't allowed to work. You weren't allowed, in a sense, you weren't allowed to be bummed out. And it was not that nobody was. The cultural expectation was, we know everybody's got hang-ups outside in their lives. Maybe you got financial difficulties. You struggle with different issues. You've got things that are bringing you down. But for this week, you're going to put those things all out there because it's inappropriate to bring them in here. What's appropriate in here is we are going to celebrate for 7 straight days. And it's a lot of where we get our modern practice of, the bride and the groom, they're all dressed up and we treat them like they're a king and a queen. And they really did that kind of stuff. They would play games. They would dance. They would have the bride and groom watch the games of volleyball or cornhole or whatever it was they were doing. And every now and then they would invite the bride and the groom into the dancing that was going on. It was dancing and feasting and games and dancing and feasting and games for 7 straight days. One commentator put it this way: a wedding feast was the most vivid picture of joy and happiness in that culture. During the week-long wedding feast, it was understood that joy was more important than conformity to religious rituals. If any ceremonial observance would detract from the joy of the wedding feast, it wasn't required. As a matter of fact, there's one rabbinical document from that time called the Scroll of Fasting, and it points out specifically that if you're fasting, you put that on pause and you go to the wedding feast. So Jesus is pulling on this image that's saying, listen, that's what this is like. I am the bridegroom. Now here's where his claims about himself and taking them seriously is very important because Jesus is answering the question, but he's making a claim about himself that's profound and very important. You see what remember, he's talking to theology experts and Bible experts. And it was well known that among the many images that God uses for himself, that I've said many times, God uses things you can see to help you understand the things that you cannot see. Jesus, or rather God, calls himself in the Old Testament, he calls himself the groom, the husband, and Israel, the bride, the wife. He draws that analogy. In the entire Old Testament that they all respected, that they all knew was always looking forward to this new day that's coming, to the Messiah that's coming, and that God's going to visit us in a very, very special way. It's coming, and they're anticipating that. Well, when he calls himself the bridegroom, he's making a claim that that's exactly what's going on. All this anticipation that's going on, this relationship of God who's the groom and Israel who's the bride, I'm here. And so, therefore, while I'm here, it's just simply inappropriate to fast. He doesn't knock fasting. As a matter of fact, he says, and he gives a little hint, the first hint of what's going to happen to him. He says, there's coming a day when I'm going to be taken away from them, and then they'll fast. So fasting is appropriate. He's not knocking it. He's just saying right now is a time of joy. Right now is a time of celebration. Now, here's the thing about that image, though. When it comes right down to what it means to follow Jesus, what does it mean to be a Christian? What does it mean to be a Christ follower, especially if you're an explorer? What's the real thing going on here? Marriage and wedding feast and everything is a very good analogy for what God's really after. And that's why he used that image in prophecies as everybody was looking forward to it. And I've been married for 33 years. We just celebrated our 33rd wedding anniversary this summer, my wife and I. And so I can say I know a little bit about marriage, and I've known a lot of people who are married. And here's what I can say about marriage. By experiencing it, studying it, observing it, and everything else, I would go so far as to say marriage is the most multidimensional, all-encompassing, fully immersive relationship a person can have. Now, I don't say that as a knock on single people who have never experienced it. It's just the way marriage is set up, that God has set it up, it is the most multi-dimensional, all-encompassing, fully immersive relationship available to anybody. And the reason I say it that way is because marriage is, among other things, it's a legal contract. It's a covenant. It's got that dimension to it, this law kind of dimension to it. It also includes, it's legal, it's romantic, it's financial, it extends to the rest of your family, your extended family. It stretches into your finance. It does all, it touches every part of life. Because if you're married, you are one. The Bible calls you one. And what you learn is that every decision you make or direction that you take or the things that you experience, you're completely connected to the person that you're married to going through that experience. It's a fully immersive thing. And I think that's why God picked that picture, and that's why Jesus goes ahead and brings it and says, this is what it's like. If we're talking relationship with me, I'm talking about multidimensional, full immersion kind of relationship that has a covenant that touches every single area of your life. Now, that's important to know, because what we're being called to is not just kind of every so often when it means to follow Jesus is, I go to church and I read an occasional Bible, and I might go to a Bible study and I just kind of occasionally think Jesus kind of thoughts or learn a little bit about him. No, to follow him, it really actually means that multidimensional, full immersion kind of relationship. So he's pointing to two different things at once. He's making an immense claim about himself and his identity. And then he's giving a picture of what that relationship is really like. And that's what I mean by when it says, following him is all about taking his claims about himself seriously. If Jesus really is that one that was predicted, if he really is that one that everything was looking forward to, well, if I really believe that, then I should entrust myself to this multidimensional, full immersion kind of experience where everything in my life is touched by my relationship with him. That's critical. So then he moves on and he says this, and here's another thing we can learn about fixing our eyes on Jesus. Let me leave this one with you. To fix your eyes on Jesus, joyfully embrace the new. To fix our eyes on Jesus, joyfully embrace the new. So Jesus starts off, he uses this image of a wedding. They shouldn't fast, they can't fast at this time because I'm with them, and it's inappropriate to do that in response. There's coming a day when they will. But then he goes on to tell the parable, and this is the first time Luke uses this word, and he's going to use it a lot with Jesus, and it goes back to God gives you things you can see to help you understand the things you cannot. The word parable literally means to set one thing beside another. It's to take an analogy. And so what he does is he does this whole thing with no one takes a new garment and uses it to patch up an old garment. In other words, I don't get this brand new shirt and I cut something out from it and I'm going to use it to patch something that's old. Or then he starts talking about wine. I don't even like wine, so I don't know a whole lot about wine. I've heard that the old is better and all that kind of thing, but it's basically the same idea. He uses two different analogies that's pretty much you don't take new things and then put them on old things because both things will get ruined. Another analogy I thought of was, I don't know if this is still true or not. It was, since I'm old, maybe this isn't in the case anymore. But I like to think that most people grew up when they first got their driver's license, had a beater car. I mean, it's like a rite of passage. You have to have a beater car. Maybe some of you still do. But I went through lots of beater cars. A beater car is just one of those that's worth a few $100s at best. It'll get you from point A to point B, maybe. Think about your first car. I remember having a car where for a long season of time, because there was something wrong with the door and I didn't have enough money to fix it, I had to get in through the passenger side. Or one of those cars where you have to bang on the dash just right and it'll start. Or back in the days of carburetors, you had to pump, if you'll pump this 6 times and hold it just away, it'll start. That's what a beater car is. Now, some of you may not even know what I'm talking about. You're one of those kids when you were 16, your parents got you the brand new car with the bow on top and all that. You need to know, no one liked you very much, okay? You need to understand that. But a beater car, and basically what he's saying by analogy is, what if you were to get a brand new car and just start taking the parts off the brand new car to put them on the old car? It would ruin the new car, but then it really wouldn't help the old one. It's this taking the new and trying to take it over to the old. What's he talking about? Well, he's making a claim about himself. He's illustrating what a relationship with him would really look like. But then also what he's doing is he's saying what he's up to. You see, John the Baptist, who was brought up in this question, and all of those guys that were following him around, they were part of a system. They were part of a system that went back to the law, not a bad system, not necessarily. Some of the things they're currently doing are not really what God intended. But what we know of is the Old Testament and the system of all those things. And he says continually, I didn't come to get rid of it. I came to fulfill it. And I'm not taking my new stuff and going in and trying to reform all these old things. What I'm doing is a completely new thing. And I'm going to bring things from the old, and fasting will still be a part of this, but it'll have completely different reasons. There'll be a whole different way of looking at things. That's what Jesus was doing. And he's saying this, what you're asking me is a part of this old system, and I'm not a part of that system. I've come to introduce an entirely new epoch, an entirely new age, an entirely new way of doing things that's revolutionary. Now, between those two things, think about it. First, he gives the portrait of a wedding, which is about joy. And then he gives a portrait of himself, where he talks, I'm introducing a whole new thing. Jesus introduced the new. And I really think as followers of his, we're supposed to be people who are passionate and can be passionate about the new. We are serving and following the ultimate revolutionary. We are serving and following the ultimate Renaissance man, the one who brought in the new thing and reformed it. He didn't go back and just say, kind of patch up old stuff. But he said, I've brought a whole new age. And one of the keys to following Jesus is understanding what that means. It doesn't mean you throw away the old. It simply means you bring the old into the new in an entirely new and freeing way. Now, we can apply this personally by remembering, first of all, that Jesus in the in-between time, now he has been taken from us now. And so in some ways, we're in the fasting season. We're in the time where it's appropriate to fast occasionally. But on the other hand, we ought to be people who are a lot more joyful than sometimes we are. And if I'm being honest, the more I reflected on my opening question, as my cultural perception of church was that people are there kind of down, not real happy. But as I look back and I remembered some people from my upbringing, I remember a lot of smiles on faces and a lot of laughter, and that's kind of cool. Now, what I don't remember at all is the church embracing the new or going forward with new things. There wasn't a lot of that sort of stuff. And I believe that the church can and should be that, as long as it's locked in to who Jesus is and what he's about and what he says is important. We can have joy in the fact that the bridegroom is here, and we can have a fully immersive, multidimensional relationship with the God of the universe. And that should be the heart of our joy. And if we're rooted in that, we can be the kind of people that are all about the new. And we're not about just going back and trying to reform old things. So I hope you'll apply that to yourself personally. But here's another thing. Corporately. So I think I've told this story before, but it's been several years ago that our church was born in 2010. We're 10 years old this year. Anniversary's coming up on 10/10/20. And so we're looking back a little bit and all that kind of stuff. But what I can say about the birth of what is known as One Life is part of it was born in a church in Evansville that I worked at, and a number of us went to, and a number of us leaders went to. And during about a 10-year stretch in that church, it was older. It had been birthed in the 1930s, and it had a pretty good tradition. And it wasn't all old stuff all the time, but it was famous for its choir. It was one of those churches that it had orchestral type music and things like that. But the senior pastor, and I was just on the staff, but the senior pastor had a vision for, we need to go forward. We need to move ahead. And we were part of the music wars that were so famous several years ago, where churches were introducing, and they put drums in the sanctuary and all that. We went through those things, but we had something edgier in mind, and we wanted it to be loud, and we wanted the lights down and all these kinds of things. And that was very, very different than what had been done before. And we kept trying to do that. And we kept making people more angry all the time. Just people kept getting angry. My favorite, non-favorite day was one Easter. We decided as leaders, okay, this Easter, we're doing this for real. We're going to go for it. We're just going to pull the pin on the grenade, and we're going to have the music loud and do all the things we've talked about doing and just let everybody have it. And it was a day when a friend of mine was standing out in the lobby, another guy on staff, he was counting the people leaving, walking out the door, furious. Because what were we trying to do? We were trying to take this new concept that we had and just kind of take it into the old. We were putting new wine in old wineskins. You know, Jesus says something interesting there. He said, people who have had the old say the old is better. They don't want the new. That's an acknowledgement. That's not him recommending, oh, you really need to drink old wine. He's not saying that. He's saying that people who drink old wine, they don't want new wine. And he's admitting that about his own movement. I'm doing a whole new thing. And there's going to be people that they're satisfied in the old deal. But if you're going to be a follower of Christ, you got to learn to think new things and move forward. And in our 10th year, with all the COVID stuff going on in 2020, we've been thinking a lot about, we know this is a time where the goal can't be just to get to the old. What's the new? What does that look like? And this week, we're going to talk a little bit about that. We're thinking some things and processing some things that we had introduced even before COVID came along. But now we're kind of thinking about it a lot more seriously because our culture's changed and so much upheaval is going on. And there's so many different things to respond to, that to do our mission and to walk in our multidimensional, fully immersive relationship with Jesus is going to require some new stuff of us, where we can bring the old kind of with us and learn from it, but go on to new things. So watch this coming week. We're going to send out some communication about what that will look like. But I would encourage you to be prepared as people who have joy because of who Jesus is and what he's given, but at the same time, people who are willing to embrace the new, because our founder, the Jesus that we're trying to fix our eyes on, is a founder of a new thing. And he told the story that you don't want to just go in and take the new and try to put it inside the old, because it'll break everything up. And we need to remember that. I want us to pray together. Father, in Jesus' name, we come before you right now and thank you very much, Lord Jesus, for the beauty of who you are. And I pray that we'll have the kind of joy that we should have at wedding feast kind of stuff, just because of who you are and what you've come to do. I also pray for anyone who doesn't have that fully immersive, multidimensional relationship with you, and they're just kind of playing religion or praying with religious practices. I ask that anybody who's there will step over the line and come to you in a true, deep, touching everything in our lives, from our finances to our relationships, our attitudes, everything kind of relationship with you. But I also pray that we'll all corporately hear your voice leading us to new things, new ways of doing things. I ask that you'll give us the power and the ability to do that, because that's who you are. It's one of the characteristics of what you do in life. Thank you for who you are. Thank you for what you do. Empower us to be more like you. In Jesus' name, amen.